And we're live. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Today we're going to do a little analysis on the October 7th attacks. Not really an analysis of what happened, but more so on the question of, was this an inside job? Many people believe this was an inside job. This was actually believed from day one of the attack. Many people didn't understand how Hamas can be so successful against Israel. This is actually also something that's believed by quite a few Israelis. It's not only anti-Israel people who believe this, it's Israelis themselves. In recent weeks or months, more and more people have kind of been putting together reports, making the case that it's an inside job. Investigative journalist Ben Swan recently put together a video making a very compelling case. We're going to watch that video. Now, just because a case is compelling doesn't mean it's true, right? Just because something seems to make sense doesn't mean it does. So we're going to review it in as honest a way as possible. For those tuning in for the first time, you might think I'm coming at this with a certain bias. Because again, generally people, when they talk about the conflict, they're either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. So if you're new here, we criticize both Israel and Palestine a lot on this channel. We are dedicated to truth and honesty. If this was an inside job, and to me the evidence adds up, I will have no problem saying that. Israel is capable of doing horrible things. We say that on this channel all the time. But I'm not one to just jump to conclusions lacking evidence. So it really needs to add up. And generally speaking, I've been studying conspiracies for many years. And I used to be more inclined to believe them. And then I understood certain flaws in reasoning that I had, or how just because something really can be compelling doesn't really speak to its truth. So we're going to review it. And the reason I'm showing Ben Swan's video is because it really is the most convincing out of all the videos I've seen. So we're going to start by watching it. We're going to put it on 2x speed just to run through it. If you're watching this after the fact, you could slow it down, this video down to 0.5 to watch it at normal speed. Okay, so I'm going to do share screen. We're going to watch this, and then we are going to do a full review. Hold on. Present. Share screen. Okay, you can all see my screen. Let me know if for some reason the audio of this doesn't come through, or if for some reason it's not working.
The Gaza Strip is continuing now into its 7th month with no signs that carnage is going to stop anytime soon. Just last week, Israel rejected a ceasefire and intensified its bombing attacks on Rafah, conducting almost hourly aerial strikes. Back on October 7th, armed with AK-47s and motorcycles, Hamas managed to breach the Gaza fence, slaughtering and capturing hundreds of Israeli soldiers and civilians in southern Israel. They called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. So what did the Israeli government know and when? It's a question almost no one in media is asking, but we are. I'm investigative journalist Ben Swan, and this is Reckoning Israel and Gaza. 7 months ago, on October 7th, Hamas was able to carry out its shocking terror attack against Israel, despite Israel's intelligence, military, and security apparatus, commonly considered to be the best in the world. Bearing in mind Israel's incredibly sophisticated and capable defenses and brigades of trained IDF soldiers stationed near the Gaza border, the scale and the operational success of the Al-Aqsa flood attack surprised even Hamas. Hamas representative Ali Baraka explained to the Washington Post the ease with which Israel's entire security apparatus disintegrated, saying, quote, "We were expecting to get a smaller number of hostages and return to Gaza, but the Israeli army collapsed in front of us. What were we to do?" Well, in response to the Al-Aqsa flood attack, the Israeli military's retaliatory efforts, codenamed Operation Swords of Iron, has resulted in the deaths of over 100 journalists, 190 United Nations staff, 34,000 Palestinians, including 13,000 children, displaced nearly the entire Gaza population of 2 million people, and cost the United States almost $50 billion. So how did October 7th happen? Well, almost everyone in mainstream media was quick to call it an intelligence failure. The Guardian told its readers on the afternoon of October 7th that Hamas's murderous attack will be remembered as an Israeli intelligence failure for the ages. While the attack was still ongoing, on October 7th, Politico quoted Israel's former deputy national security advisor saying, quote, "It's a failure in terms of intelligence. Operationally, it's clear that we were caught totally unprepared by this." And on October 8th, Jonathan Panikoff, former deputy national intelligence officer on the Middle East, who's now at the Atlantic Council think tank, firmly educated the public that, quote, "This was an intelligence failure. It could not be otherwise." In fact, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu quickly tweeted, then deleted a statement saying that he had absolutely no prior knowledge of this coming attack, saying, quote, "Under no circumstances and at no stage was Prime Minister Netanyahu warned of war intentions on the part of Hamas." The tweet said that before it was promptly deleted. Why did Netanyahu's team delete that tweet? Did he, in fact, have intelligence that there would be an attack by Hamas? Well, the evidence seems to point to only one answer. Yes. Foreign security services, Israeli security services, and the Israeli public all knew that Hamas was planning a violent cross-border incursion where they would attempt to overrun and attack the kibbutz communities in southern Israel and then take prisoners back to Gaza. And they also knew when. But it happened anyway, 10 days before the attack. And then again, 3 days before the attack, Egypt's intelligence officials actually sent repeated warnings to the highest levels of the Israeli government. In one of those warnings, Egypt's premier intelligence minister, General Abbas Kamel, personally called Netanyahu and warned him that Hamas was about to do, quote, "something unusual, a terrible operation." Unnamed Egyptian officials told Ynet News that they were shocked by Netanyahu's indifference to the news. But Israel didn't have to trust or believe Egypt, because actually, most of the warnings of the October 7th attack came from Israeli civilians and the Israeli military itself. The civilians and soldiers who brought these emergency warnings to the military were ignored, and in some cases, strangely enough, threatened with legal action. So let's go all the way back to 2022 and then work our way forward to the days before the October 7th attacks. In 2022, the IDF, through confidential sources or spies in Gaza, actually obtained the detailed Hamas Al-Aqsa flood attack plans. Codenamed Jericho Wall by Israel, that incursion plan called for a barrage of rockets to begin the attack, and then for gunmen to pour into Israel en masse via paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, and then take hostages back into Gaza. All of it, every bit of that happened on October 7th. Hamas followed its own blueprints that Israel already had in its possession with shocking precision. So Israel literally had the attack blueprints, but were they taken seriously by the IDF? Again, yes. The plans were diligently studied. In fact, a presentation on the planned attack was given to senior officers in the IDF's Gaza division. The presentation concluded with this sentence, quote, "This invasion constitutes the gravest threat that IDF forces are facing in the defense of Israel." So in response to all of this, did Israel's intelligence apparatus actually enhance or beef up their surveillance of the Hamas militants along the Gaza border? Well, actually, not only is the answer no, but stunningly, they did the exact opposite. They decided to entirely stop monitoring Hamas's handheld radio traffic because they saw it as a waste of effort. Even though during that same time, in 2022, Israelis living in the kibbutz communities near the Gaza border, most of whom have some type of military training because of Israel's mandatory IDF service laws, they were, according to Israeli media, picking up clear evidence that Hamas was practicing the breaching of the fence and conquering kibbutzim and seizing hostages and destroying everything in their path. Then in April of 2023, again, this is still 6 months before the attack, the IDF, according to Israeli media, actually did something even more surprising. They restricted the ability of Israeli citizens living along the border to monitor Hamas's wireless traffic. In September of 2023, that's less than a month before the attack, the head of the IDF's Devil's Advocate intelligence unit, which challenges prevailing narratives within Israel's military, twice alerted senior decision makers in both the army and the political spheres about Hamas's plans for a large-scale cross-border military operation. He reiterated those warnings in person at intelligence branch strategic assessment sessions on September 26th and September 27th. This is just days before the attack. During this period, again, just days before the Al-Aqsa flood attack, Israeli civilians residing in the kibbutzim near the Gaza border were witnessing with their own eyes and ears constant and enormous Hamas training exercises. The army reportedly turned a blind eye. One of these Israelis, Ben Shoshan, worked as a tour guide in the southeastern Israeli region surrounding Gaza. In a radio interview just days before October 7th, she remarked, quote, "Hamas has been training for weeks, right up against the border, sometimes in massive numbers. I tried to warn the officers, but they told me I didn't know anything and that I was safe." On October 3rd, a journalist for Israeli Public Radio tweeted and made crystal clear that the bizarre and violent Hamas drills that were taking place on the Gaza side of the border were evident to everyone who was living alongside that border, including the Israeli military. The Islamic Jihad organization started noisy exercises very close to the border with missile launches, simulating breaking into Israel and kidnapping soldiers. Didi Fold, a resident of Netiv Hatara, said, "It was significantly closer than previous times. The children wake up and they ask what's going on. There are explosions, booms. It is not similar to previous exercises." So it was clear to everyone that Hamas wasn't only planning to do something horrible, but it was also clear exactly what that horrible and evil thing was. According to a female IDF soldier who spoke to Israel's Channel 12 news program, she was constantly trying to warn her superiors about the gravity of the Hamas training exercises. And she was threatened with legal action, saying, quote, "We were told that if we continue to harass on this issue, you will stand trial." So Egypt knew, the Israeli military knew, and the Israeli civilians knew. And yet 2 days before October 7th, the Israeli military took 2 entire commando brigades, that's around 100 soldiers, away from the soon-to-be breached locations of the Gaza border and sent them to the other side of the country, to the West Bank village of Huwara. Despite no Hamas presence being in Huwara, and despite there being giant Israeli dance parties taking place right along the same border fence where violent, escalating, and obvious Hamas drills of breaching and kidnapping were taking place. Does this make any sense? And have you heard about these dance parties? Because it turns out there's bizarre and inexplicable narratives surrounding the planning of these now infamous dance parties in Israel along the Gaza border. What had not been widely reported is the fact that there were actually 2 back-to-back dance parties in Kibbutz Riyam, which is also the location of the IDF's Gaza division. It's only 3 miles from the Gaza border. The first party, planned months in advance, was a party called the Unity Festival. It took place on October 5th and 6th. Then the Nova Festival, the October 7th party, was actually added last minute, only a few days in advance of the event. So for obvious reasons, any significantly large gatherings on the Israeli side of the border with Gaza require Israeli military approval. Again, this is a part of the story that virtually no American media network will talk about. According to Israeli media reports, Lieutenant Colonel Sahir Fogel, an operations officer at the IDF's Gaza division, opposed the approval of the Nova party based on a couple of things: the last-minute nature of its event application, the intensifying Hamas drills at the border, and because if something were to happen, more soldiers were on holiday. It was the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. The lieutenant colonel explained his opposition to the party's approval to his superiors, and he was instructed to allow the event to happen. Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that other Gaza division officers privately told of irregular conduct and pressure surrounding the approval of that party. In February of 2024, Elkanah Fetterman, the head of security of the Nova Festival, gave an interview to Israel's Channel 14 where he made a statement that has not been reported on by any American media. He said this, quote, "I had a guard at the festival who had served in the Ream division near the Gaza border, and a week before the festival, he sent me a voice message, basically warning me, saying, quote, Elkanah, something is going to happen over Sukkot. I just wanted to let you know there were a lot of warnings. I passed the voice message on to the local IDF officials, and they told me everything was all right." After the attack, Fetterman called his friend in the IDF and asked him exactly what he knew, saying, quote, "You were speaking in codes. Tell me exactly what they showed you." He told me, "Elkanah, they told me there was going to be an invasion and that they were planning to take over settlements. I just wasn't allowed to tell you that." And that's what happened. If he knew what he knew, a driver on the Gaza border, what did those above him know? Because he is a small screw in the system, end quote. The Hamas attacks were violent and brutal, and they've been likened to tragic events such as the September 11th attacks or even the Holocaust, which makes it strange that Benjamin Netanyahu and members of his party have at times described these attacks as somewhat of a political gift. Nissim Vaturi, a member of Netanyahu's party in the Knesset, referred to the attack as sort of a gift from God because they are being used to justify the current ongoing war, stating, quote, "We were meant to fight this war against Hamas, as is happening now, and luckily for us, it came from the heavens." Well, back in January, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained that Israel did not have the domestic or international support to invade or destroy Gaza. He said the October 7th Hamas attack solved both of those problems for him. Listen to this.
We couldn't get the domestic consensus to make such a definitive solution to the problem of Hamas. That is, no one would agree across the Israeli public to go in and basically destroy Hamas, go throughout Gaza and destroy Hamas. We didn't have the international consensus either. Nobody would understand why we're doing it. Both conditions were created because of the Hamas savage attack on Israel on October 7th.
All of this information has been reported in isolation and without context. That is until now, but it in no way excuses the violent and brutal Hamas attacks of October 7th, in which so many lives were lost. But it does raise an important question, a question that brave people have to consider. Did the Israeli military, the Israeli intelligence community, and the political leadership of Israel allow this ghastly attack to happen to justify wiping out the population of Gaza? It also raises big questions for us. What type of war is the Biden administration and U.S. taxpayers supporting? Is this a war of self-defense, or is it genocide, justified by an attack that Israel likely could have stopped had it wanted to? These are heavy questions. But rather than simply dismissing what we're saying, prove me wrong. If you haven't already, you can follow us on X, truth_in_media, or you can follow this series by signing up to see each episode as it comes out at truthinmedia.com. And at Truth in Media, you're going to find the transcript of the story along with the source articles. So check them out for yourself and continue to follow along as we continue to unveil the truth around Israel's war on Gaza.
Okay, so you watch that, very compelling, right? Like, it's not hard to understand why somebody would watch that, watching that would reach the conclusion that it's for certain an inside job. So I'm going to just share a few different points, part of our framing of like how we make sense of things, part of some things related to perspectives and evidence that wasn't shown, and to kind of give a more thorough look at what actually happened. Now, generally speaking, when you work in media, whether you're doing a report or a documentary, your goal is to really make as compelling a case as possible, right? Ben Swan certainly has an incentive to make this to make a compelling case. If he kind of made it neutral and asked questions but posed counters, it would be more intellectually honest, but it wouldn't do nearly as well in terms of views, right? People like these compelling arguments. They like things that are simple and easy to understand. And it really is a problem in media and in activism because people are incentivized to take these more simplistic approaches to things rather than giving people a more thorough, nuanced approach. But that's what this channel is all about, going deep. Now, I've reviewed this, and there were at times where I'm like, I was almost convinced this was an inside job. And upon more thorough review, I reached the conclusion that it is not. And I'll explain why for a few reasons. So first of all, just a little bit about how we kind of view things. So humans are great at recognizing patterns. You know, it's on a more simplistic level. You could see how pattern recognition kept us alive. We had to know red berry good, green berry poisonous, animal with fangs dangerous, cute looking animal safe. I'm going super simple. Now, this was very effective, but in the complexity of the world today, we're often connecting dots and recognizing patterns that don't really paint the right picture. And here's just an example, right? Us Homo sapiens have looked to the stars and we see images, we see constellations, dozens of them, right? There's no Little and Big Dipper actually up there, right? Orion's belt is not there. These things don't really exist, but when we look, we're able to connect dots. This is just like maybe a simple way to understand how we're doing this. Now, there's a concept of hindsight bias, which is a form of cognitive bias. And then there's another concept of post hoc rationalization, which is a type of logical fallacy. They're kind of pointing at the same things. It's really pointing at our ability to look at things in hindsight and make sense of them, when at the time it was much harder to make sense of things. So that's kind of the psychology of it all at play. It happened. We look back. We're recognizing these patterns. We're like, oh, this was obvious. How'd they not know at the time? It must be a conspiracy. So why don't I think that this was actually an inside job? So first, let's talk about what is the actual hypothesis. The hypothesis is Benjamin Netanyahu was looking for an excuse to invade Gaza and defeat Hamas, and he needed a major attack for that to happen. So first of all, there's flaws in this hypothesis as they are. First of all, Netanyahu is not known to be a big risk taker. He's actually historically one that plays it safe. He would rather just maintain the status quo, and the maintenance of the status quo, minimal violence, minimal turmoil, allows him to maintain the idea that he will keep Israel stable and safe. This is his primary platform position. He's not one that likes these massive incursions, these huge risks. That's one. Two, this whole idea of defeating Hamas is one that most analysts, even from very early on, saw is not likely to happen. It's something very challenging to do. And it's something that it wasn't only not done because there wasn't a public consensus, but because Israel doesn't really have a clear strategy on how to do it. When it comes to defeating them militarily, I think Israel knows very well that they can't entirely defeat them the same way the U.S. couldn't defeat the Taliban after 20 years of fighting. What they could do is take over Gaza and find a replacement government, but Israel has shown zero plan to do that. So it's not like they're coming with a ready plan to replace Hamas. What they're doing is acting in a very reactionary way. They hit us hard, let's hit them back harder, let's save face, let's show the Israeli public that we are strong. Also, for Benjamin Netanyahu to allow the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust on his watch, the same guy whose primary platform position is security, is not in line with who he is and what he values. This has been the most massive blunder in his long career of blunders. The idea that he would take this responsibility upon himself, put aside his conscience, right? To allow Jews to die for political gain. One can say, you know what? I think he'd be willing to do that. I'm not even going to argue that. Let's say he's purely self-interested. For him to destroy his legacy just to invade Gaza, a war that with no clear path to victory, doesn't really make much sense. It doesn't. Another thing, and this is a way to kind of break down conspiracies, is the question of how many people need to be involved for this conspiracy to actually happen. The more people that need to be involved, the less likely it is to be true. On one hand, it requires a greater level of organization, and it requires a greater level of keeping a secret. Now here, look at the secret multiple parties would need to keep, that we are going to let our citizens get butchered just for political gain. Now, Netanyahu does not give direct orders to the soldiers. There's a chain of command, and you would essentially, and if you look at Ben's video, He says this person told the officers, this person warned this person. There were many, he mentioned many different people in the chain of command, but you have at the top Netanyahu, the prime minister, but below him you have the secretary of defense. You then have the IDF general. You then have the head of the Gaza division. You then have brigade officers, individual officers, like lower ranking officers, and then you have soldiers. Essentially, to allow this to happen, you would need to have multiple people, probably 10 plus people in the loop, and have them keep a secret about them. So to say, hey guys, we're going to allow this attack to happen so we could take Gaza, don't tell anybody, and think that that many people in the army would allow their citizens to get butchered that way just so they could go into Gaza, it's highly unlikely. What's more likely is our ability to connect dots and make sense of things. Now, it is true there were Ben Swan does make a good point. He did say a few incorrect things or intellectually dishonest things, but one thing he did say is this wasn't an intelligence failure, and there he's correct. That is actually a mistake I made on this channel on a few occasions. On the early days after October 7th, I said this is the greatest intelligence and military failure in Israel's history. It was not an intelligence failure. We see that. The intelligence was actually spot on. It was a military failure. Now, how did the military fail so badly? Actually, real quick, I want to show a thing just on Netanyahu real quick. So just casting some doubt on Ben and his approach. So first of all, he says at the very beginning, 13,000 children have been killed. That's not a number that has been verified. I'm not saying it's impossible, but based on the names and ID numbers that have been released, currently it's less than half of that. That's still horrific. I'm not saying that is okay, but again, him being an investigative journalist, we would expect a higher level of intellectual honesty from him. Now, wait, where did that video go? Okay, so he showed a clip from Netanyahu about saying, hold on. He showed a clip from Netanyahu. Now, if you look at the full clip, it actually paints a slightly different picture. This shouldn't be surprising, right? Journalists do this all the time. They cut the parts that, to prove the point they're trying to make. Now, it's not that this completely absolves Netanyahu, but it does show a slightly different picture in what he was saying. So this was a long interview, and just so you all know, I didn't watch the whole interview to find the full clip. I took it, I transcribed it through some transcriber, and then searched for a keyword. Just a little hack to do shit quicker. But okay, I'm gonna share this again. Cool. Alone Paris says this is a great analysis. I hope this reaches a wider audience. I do too. And you know what? Share it with everybody you know. Let's get this out there.
Domestic issues in Israel. It seems to me that the Israeli public had suffered such a shock and are still going through a trauma about what happened on the 7th, because they never believed that this was possible. They never believed, they believed that there were rockets that would come in. They knew that they had that for years, but they never thought it was possible that Hamas would break through and come right into Israel. Some people I speak to say in Israeli politics and security establishment that you had the conception wrong, that the conception was that Hamas wanted to be corrupt and get rich, and that the government, security services and others didn't believe that they actually wanted to do what they did on the 7th.
Well, it's actually, it may be true of some people, but it certainly wasn't true of me, because I believe that we can't cut deals with Hamas. I called them ISIS many years ago. When they took over, I said, this is Hamastan. These people will work to attack us. I warned that they would rocket us. This was dismissed at the time that we left Gaza. I left the government before that happened. I resigned from the government. I said, this is what will happen. We'll have a terrorist state of these this Muslim Brotherhood branch that will seek to destroy Israel. So the question was, what do you do about it? And my conclusion was that we have to continuously cut these wild weeds. But we didn't get the agreement to actually yank out the weeds.
So real quick, here he's saying my conclusion was we need to continuously cut the weeds, which is very similar to language that's been used by government leadership before that. We need to, every few years, mow the lawn. So this is what he's saying he's suggesting. And now he's going on to say there wasn't a consensus. He's not saying he wanted a consensus. He's talking about him wanting to mow the lawn, and we'll continue.
Because, as I once said in a government meeting, I said this would require sacrificing hundreds of our soldiers, and probably will end up having quite a few casualties on the Palestinian population, given Hamas's tactic of hiding behind civilians while attacking our civilians, and it will create other problems. We couldn't get the domestic consensus to make such a definitive solution to the problem.
So this is the part we saw, right? But so he's saying my suggestion was that we need to continuously cut the weeds. I said in a video, in a meeting, that this will cost hundreds of soldiers' lives and a toll on civilians and international attention. He's nowhere, and he doesn't go into specifics. He's not saying that he brought this up in a cabinet meeting in support of this. He very well may have brought it up in opposition to this idea. And being one who doesn't take large risks, it very well may be the case that he brought this up in opposition to it. Now, he's not going to publicly say I was opposed to it because it would make him look bad. But again, Ben Swan did not give full context here. Now, how did the military fail to such a great extent? So we often attribute malice to what should just be attributed to stupidity or incompetence, or in this regard, I think arrogance to a large extent. First of all, this whole idea of Hamas wanting to invade Israel and take hostages, this isn't a new idea. This has been something that Israel has known Hamas would like to do for over a decade, right? It's not like we just got these reports and they were the first reports on such a plan. This has been something that Israel knew Hamas has some interest in doing for a decade plus now. So it's not like there was out of the blue, suddenly you get reports of an attack and you're like, oh, whoa, we've never heard this before. No, this has been an ongoing thing. And in reality, they just thought, let them try. We have a fence, we have drones, we have cameras, we have military, we could deploy more troops if we need. Let them try, they won't succeed. But they didn't, I think even with intelligence, most didn't even think that they would attempt it. Now, why would they not think they would attempt it despite the intelligence? Intelligence reports come in all the time. Same thing with 9/11, right? There was a report of an attack prior to 9/11, and people said, oh, you see, Bush knew about it. He wanted it to happen. But the thing is, reports come in all the time, and often they're not acted on because you think that the security will take care of itself. In hindsight, you could then look and say, you see, they knew. But there has been relative quiet with Hamas for over 2 years prior to October 7th. There wasn't any direct engagement between Israel and Hamas. In fact, just this past year in 2023, Netanyahu allowed for, I believe the number is 15,000 Gazans to enter Israel every day to work. This is really his maintenance of the status quo, or maybe even, I very rarely give Netanyahu credit. This will be a minor point of credit. One can say he was trying to improve the situation and keep stability and quiet with Hamas. Again, not a big risk taker. He thought we could keep them contained. We'll let Gazans in. We'll help improve the economy. There's no reason to think that after 2 years of quiet, after we just allowed more civilians in, that they're going to attack us, take soldiers, and ruin it all, and just allow, in return, have Gaza be destroyed. Given the quiet and given the fact that reports come in all the time of similar things, it wasn't so obvious at the time that even though there isn't an intelligence report or a warning that, they're definitely going to do it now. It seems like most of the military thought, they're likely not going to try. And if they do, we got this. Now, they talk also about the brigades that were moved a few days prior. That did happen, right? So, that's awfully suspicious. If you have all these warnings, why move brigades? Well, the reason brigades were moved is because there was increasing tension in the West Bank, more visible tension, right? Not just security warnings, but actual protests and stone throwing. They started to see this increase in tension there, and they wanted to increase the security presence before the holidays. Now, what is more likely is not that Israel took away the army so Hamas could attack. It's that Hamas took advantage of the situation that there weren't many troops on the border and attacked just then. It was more so opportunistic, right? Let's say Israel saw these warnings. They're like, oh, we're going to take these warnings seriously. Let's put all our troops on the border. Hamas wouldn't have attacked, right? It seems like they were patient and waited for an opportunistic time. Happened to be a festival. There happened to be not many troops on the border. It was a holiday. Let's attack now. We saw this also happen in the Yom Kippur War in 72 or 73. Why do I always forget that? Yom Kippur 73, yeah. Right. It was something similar in the Yom Kippur War. It was very opportunistic. That is more logical than to think they moved them in order for them to attack. No, they attacked at that time because the border didn't have a high level of military personnel. And if it did, they very well may have postponed their attack. There wasn't a high level of urgency. They could have waited a week, a month, maybe even a year. So I think that, and look, if we want to give any benefit of the doubt to the fact that this was an inside job, what maybe could have happened is, Netanyahu could have said, you know what, if there's an attack, it won't be the worst. We have a strong military, but if there's an attack, it'll be minor, and that'll just unify the country and the protests, and the support would rally behind me, right? That is possible. But for him to then say, hey, chief of defense, hey, general, we're going to let this happen, just the chance of that happening is pretty close to zero. There's a much higher chance that we just didn't take the warning seriously. We were arrogant about it. And we didn't expect the sophistication of their attack either, right? We didn't think they would use drones to take out the cameras. It really was it had a level of sophistication that was greater than anything we've seen from them. So that is a much more likely possibility than the fact that B be just for political gain. And we already explained the hypothesis doesn't really make sense. Started informing those below him to allow it to happen, informing 10, 20 people about it, and they all just have kept the secret. No one's leaked anything. No one's thrown him under the bus for allowing this to happen. The chance of that is pretty close to zero. So yeah, when you watch a video that's constructed in a certain way, you could reach a certain conclusion. It's not hard to reach that conclusion. But if you actually take a step back and look at it objectively and understand that just because certain dots are connected doesn't mean there's not other dots that need to be taken into the equation to see a fuller picture. And it's challenging because we're essentially like fighting against our wiring, right? We're kind of wired to connect these dots and reach conclusions. So anybody who, like somebody wrote, Gandalf Mr. Potter at the beginning goes, I'm more pro-Palestina. I've looked into this a little bit, but still can't honestly and objectively conclude that it was an inside job. So, Mr. Potter, for you to look into and reach that conclusion while being pro-Palestine means you have a high level of integrity and intellectual honesty, right? So I commend you for reaching that conclusion. People who are pro-Israel may reach a similar conclusion, but not for the right reasons, right? They're just going to give Israel the benefit of the doubt. But so this should be a practice for all of us, right? Just because something seems compelling doesn't necessarily mean it's true. And it's always important to try to get a bigger picture. Ask yourself, what is the hypothesis? See if that hypothesis really makes sense. Try to poke holes in the hypothesis, and then see if there's any counter evidence, right? And this takes work. Most people don't want to do the work. They just want to believe a video that or a claim that just supports their whatever their preconceived notion is, right? We have this confirmation bias. We look to believe things that support our worldview. So I'm calling on everybody to challenge that within us and constantly be challenging our worldview and try to see a bigger picture and reach more accurate conclusions. I don't want to be hyperbolic, but humanity very well may depend on our ability to do this. Cool. So that's pretty much what I got for this review. I'm down to do some Q&A if people want to share thoughts or ask questions. If not, we'll wrap it up. Yeah, so or adds, Ben did make some factual mistakes. For example, Reim kibbutz is not the Reim division base. They're actually a few kilometers away. That's true. And or saying also some far-right Israelis said it was an inside job by lefty IDF, just showing how delusion the far right and left is. Yeah, I've actually heard, I've heard from both the very right-wing Israelis, but I've also heard from more centrist and left-wing Israelis that have said it's an inside job. And I get it. You know, there's something awfully suspicious about it. And sometimes it's easier to admit that. I don't know. I was going to say it might be easier to admit that we fucked up rather than not fucked up, but that we let them do it rather than they succeeded this on their own. Like they were smart and good enough to do this on their own. It must have been us. Like maybe many people don't want to give Hamas enough credit to think that they could have succeeded on something like this. Possible. Let's see, anything else worth addressing here? Cool. If that's it, we'll keep it short and sweet. Cowboy Roy Rogers goes, God wins, evil fails. Hallelujah, praise Yahweh. Amen, brother. Inshallah. Bezrat Hashem. I'm agnostic. I'm just throwing out these religious terms, but I support you, you know. Or saying maybe it was a PA inside job. Yeah, so we could destroy Hamas and then have them rule Gaza, which it's quite unfortunate that that's not part of our plan, right? Like, let's take a few more minutes and talk about the state of the war right now, because Netanyahu's saying like what's the term he used? He's saying whatever this phase of the war is over, we're now focusing on Lebanon. We'll kind of maintain a certain level of security, but we're not doing any large operations. That's a summary. I could try to find let me try to find what they said. So the only way to defeat Hamas, you're not going to get to a situation, or you're very unlikely to get to a situation where you defeat them in the sense where that's it, they surrender, they're done. You could point to other conflicts where governments have surrendered, right? People can compare it to Germany, Nazi Germany, and Imperial Japan. There's a very different mentality to Hamas that really has an Islamic ideology and a very strong relationship with martyrdom, because they don't, for them, civilians dying, for them, their people dying is not bad. It's martyrdom. It's perfectly fine. They're rewarded in heaven. So I'm not going to say there's no consideration, but it seems like there's little consideration to harm caused to civilians. As long as they can maintain an insurgency in Gaza, they will. They could fight for years. You know, Israel could fully control Gaza for years, and they can still have some kind of military insurgency causing soldiers to die. And, you know, our response to that insurgency will just cause more civilians to die. The only way to actually defeat them is to replace them with somebody who is stable enough to hold the territory. And this is where Israel, well, just another area where Israel is failing, because they don't have that plan. They already said it won't be the Palestinian Authority. They outright reject that idea. And, you know, the Palestinian Authority hasn't been the optimal partner for peace, but they are far more optimal than Hamas. The PA recognized Israel's right to exist in 1989. Israel still has never actually officially recognized the Palestinian state, FYI. There's certainly room to negotiate with the PA, but we're trying to weaken them. We don't want them to have both the West Bank and Gaza. This seems like a grave mistake. Okay, so what's another solution? What are there any other factions that are relevant? Palestinian factions, honestly, I don't think so. Not that aren't more extreme than Hamas themselves. So it's either we replace them with the PA, we find an external entity to replace them, right? We could, people bring up the idea of like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, let them control Gaza. They're not interested. Now, I don't know how much the United States and Israel has tried to convince them. They do have these like gas fields outside of the coast of Gaza. I almost feel like if you kind of give them the gas fields, just, hey, whoever controls Gaza gets access to those gas fields. I feel like that would be compelling enough for somebody to want to control Gaza. Now, the Pondering Jew says, expel the Arabs now. So we like to talk about solutions that are relevant and realistic and not absolutely immoral. So we don't consider that a relevant solution, but you could go preach that elsewhere. Now, another solution is to just, say Hamas will continue to rule and maintain the status quo as usual, which means we'll just be back in the same situation in who knows how many years, right? They will rebuild their capabilities within years. They're going to get billions of dollars to rebuild Gaza. A lot of that will be funneled to just rebuilding their military capabilities. And then all the death that we saw, not only on October 7th, the soldiers who have died since, and the tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians would be dead in vain. If we just go back to the status quo. The only way to feel slightly better about all the death and destruction is if, when all is said and done, we're in a better situation than we were prior to October 7th. So another solution, and people don't like this, or they think it's naive or impossible. And you know what? I'd admit that when I reflect on my views and where I might be wrong, this is actually one of them. When I say I think it's possible to actually negotiate with Hamas and over time have them evolve into a legitimate entity. The reason I say this is because we've seen it done before. There's countless examples of terror organizations who have then become legitimate governments. Hey, in fact, the Israeli government, we started as militias that engaged in terrorism. The PLO was also a terror organization that gained legitimacy. So I think that's actually possible with Hamas. We've even seen them try to modernize with their new charter in 2017. They have offered, when they were elected, they did offer a 10-year truce to Israel, not on such favorable terms, but Israel outright rejected the truce. We didn't negotiate. We didn't try to find some compromise. Again, some people say they only wanted the truce to build up capability so they could attack us. I hear that counter, but I do think there actually is a path to negotiation and compromise with Hamas. But as I said, this might be an area where I'm actually wrong, where I'm too hopeful, where I'm too optimistic that this is possible. And the reason I lean towards something like this is because I actually think even though it would be challenging, right? Like it really comes down to taking an entity whose current desire is to destroy Israel to change their mind about that. That's not easy to do, but I think it's possible. And I think that if we could do that, it's actually the path of least destruction, right? Like destroying them, we see how much destruction that causes, or attempting to destroy them, we see how much destruction it causes. Replacing them with a different entity won't end the violence because whatever entity comes in will be battling Hamas for who knows how long. If we could find a way to actually compromise and negotiate with them, that would actually be the least destructive path. It just, A, certainly isn't easy, and B, I'm open to the idea that it's not possible, although I think it is, and I think it's certainly worth attempting. Okay, let's see. Or says the gas fields are an economic loss. Interesting. Okay. Can you share more? Maybe drop an article. Gandalf, Mr. Potter says they need to empower the PO. Is that PLO or Palestinian Authority? For those who don't know, the Palestinian Liberation Organization became the Palestinian Authority. Yes, they're corrupt, but they're far more, for the most part, not terrorist attacks and violence Israel proper by Palestinians or in the West Bank. Yeah, I mean, and whenever there are terror attacks that come from the West Bank, it's generally lone wolf and it's not PA sponsored. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Even the UAE proposed to develop the gas field knowing it will be an economic loss. Wait, why would they propose to do that if they know it would be an economic loss? I'm a little bit confused. There's oil and natural gas beneath Gaza and off the shore of Gaza region as well, not just surrounding areas. Yep, that's what I know. But Orr seems to think it's an economic loss. I'm interested in knowing more about that. Elias goes, there's a religious element to Israel's tenacity in preventing and reducing Palestinian hold on the land as well. No, ultimately on both sides, I don't think the religion was ever a marginal issue. Yeah, so there have always been, from early Zionism all the way until now, there has always been an expansionist element. Interestingly, it has not been the majority, right? If you look at like the percentage of the Israeli population that want us to hold Gaza, it's around 20%. But what we see is that when violence breaks out, expansionists often get their way. They might be motivated by religion or nationalism, but when there's a security risk, you can make the case for expansionism for security. And that is the underlying factor that speaks to all Israelis. Some are ultranationalists, many are religious, but what all of them care about from left to right is security. So the more fear Israelis have, the more in danger they perceive to be in or are in, the more these expansionists get their way. Which is also why the Palestinian resistance, primarily focusing on violence, has just been fuel to the fire that is the expansionism. Right? You need to think, and again, I know it's not so simple, but like if Palestinians accepted the UN partition plan in 1947, they'd have a whole lot more land. Israel would have zero justification to expand their territory. Now, we like to, this is another hindsight's 2020, right? Maybe if Palestinians knew that they'd still be fighting 75 years later, that they should have accepted the partition plan. But at the time, I get it. Why would you accept to give 55% of your land to the minority of the population, a population that just a few years or a few decades ago showed up from Europe? Like there's no, we like to frame it often. The pro-Israel side likes to frame it as, why wouldn't they compromise? Why wouldn't they accept us having a homeland? If we were in their shoes, we wouldn't have accepted that. Like when the Romans conquered us 2,000 years ago, if they said, you know what, we're just going to have our state, you can have 45% of land, we'll have the rest, we wouldn't accept that. We would have fought. And, when they tried to conquer us, we did fight and they expelled us. In fact, Palestinians aren't so different from Jews in how they act. The fact that they still are talking about the right of return, that they still want to return in their homeland, they won't give up on the fight, sounds awfully similar to us wanting to return even after 2,000 years. And, maybe it's not surprising that we have very similar origins, right? If you look at Palestinian DNA, there's a lot of Jewish ancestry there. Jews, many Jews 2,000 years ago, and it wasn't one exile where they all left. It was over like decades where Jews were leaving the land because it wasn't favorable. They went to Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. But those who stayed, many of them just over time became Muslim and Arabized, and they're essentially the family of the same Jews that left to Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. And then we returned. By the time we returned, trying to establish his homeland, we didn't see them as our long lost family. We saw them as just kind of in the way, in the way of us achieving our homeland. Anyways, let's see. Gandalf, Mr. Potter goes, I don't know, the real conspiracy theory, Jared Kushner praising the very valuable potential of Gaza's waterfront property. Yeah, that was a dumb statement. Like, sometimes it's better to just keep your mouth shut. I agree. I added your video to my Israel-Palestine playlist with video from ancient history. Okay. Thank you, Cowboy. I appreciate that. Yeah, so, you know, this channel is growing day by day, which is cool. We don't do like much like viral content, and because it's a very like in-depth and nuanced stuff, we're never speaking to the masses, right? Those who appreciate this are really in the minority. They're kind of the free thinkers, the nuanced thinkers. I'm speaking to everybody watching this right now. If you're here, you're not just you're likely not a propagandist. You likely, you know, have not only capacity but an interest in having a nuanced understanding of things. But it's not the fastest way to growth. If I were to come and just do these straight propaganda videos, whether Zionist or anti-Zionist, this channel would you know have much more subscribers now. Especially if I were to take an anti-Zionist Jew, right? Because everybody likes that Jewish anti-Zionist, especially one that served in the IDF. Like if I really wanted to blow this channel up, I would just sell out to that position. But I have no interest in doing that because growth is not my primary intention. Obviously, I'd like these views to get these ideas, not only mine, but just the people we have on this channel. I'd love that to get out to more people, but I'm not gonna sell out. You know, integrity is way more important than views. Not for everybody, obviously, but for me, certainly. I'm never going to sell it for views. And, you know, I even see there's often I'll do a video that is net negative in terms of subscribers, right? Some videos actually cause the channel to lose subscribers. Oh, well, we're going to keep doing it, you know? Being able to sleep good at night knowing you're living in integrity is more important than anything else. Evan goes, I think we need a NATO-like agreement in the Middle East where all the powerful and less powerful countries protect each other from attack. Yeah, that's cool. You know, I think I think it's possible. Abraham Accords was a step in the right direction. You know, when people you know lose hope, one way, you know, remind them that who would have thought 10 years ago, who would have thought that Israelis can go to Dubai and feel safer than they currently do in New York or many places in Europe? Who would have thought that possible? Who would have thought that we're on the verge of normalizing ties with Saudi Arabia? Who would have thought that possible? Change is the only constant, and the world changes now, faster now than ever before. I can see this broader coalition of Middle Eastern countries. And I think if that happens, that could help solve the conflict by putting necessary pressure on both sides to make necessary concessions. I could see that happening. The question is like, how do we do that in a way that doesn't just create a huge Middle Eastern war between, you know, this coalition and then like the opposition, which would be Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, and maybe Iraq as well at this point. Right, we got to get them in the mix somehow. Why can't we all just get along, honestly? What the hell are we still fighting about these days? This is according to Palestinian Investment Fund assessment. Cost of development is around 1.4 billion, while the revenue is about 1.7 you'll make. So that's the total you can get from the gas fields, the total amount. Interesting. Yeah, I mean that $300 million, that's not a great return on investment. No, I would agree with that. Oh, you wrote another comment, or they proposed it as a way to increase stability by subsidizing the project. He believed it will be an asset that Hamas will be forced to be more careful, but it goes back to the idea that Hamas cares. Okay, good to know. So LS goes, perhaps why not invite spokespeople for organizations that promote intermediate nuanced positions such as yourself? So we do that sometimes. Just, you know, I'm so busy. Like I'm an entrepreneur. You know, I'm building a company to, in fact, One I'm not so active in. One's a company in Israel. The other one is out here in LA. So I'm so busy. So I have time to do one live stream a week, but like doing outreach to different guests. If anybody wants to help, right? We do have some volunteers helping to do outreach, but if anybody wants to help do outreach, I'd gladly have anybody on the program who's willing to engage respectfully. I just don't have the capacity to do this outreach. It's also one of the tasks I hate the most, sending emails. Ugh. Even with my job, like the worst part of my day is sending emails. One day I'll have an AI assistant that will do all of that for me. Gandalf, Mr. Potter, I'm North African, I'm Muslim. I try to be as objective as I can. I agree with most of your opinions, but above all, I can see integrity and humanity, whether I agree or not, which is all that matters. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate your approach as well. Nahum Sullivan says, what videos led to net loss in subscribers? Yeah, you want to see the dashboard? I don't know if the dashboard really matters, but I did one the other day, which was an Israel-Palestine call-in show. And I think I was quite critical of Israel at the beginning and talking about how the war is not going well. And this was after, I think, a few weeks of not streaming because I was away. So what I think happened was a lot of people discovered the channel. They had a perception that maybe this is like a very pro-Israel channel. And then they saw that live stream, like, oh, this isn't what I thought, and they unsubscribed. I think that video had like a net loss of 7 subscribers, which again, it's not a lot, but that's just one example. Here, let me show you all the dashboard. Why not? You know, I don't. Analytics. Cool. Present. We're going on 50. Okay, we'll end it soon. Cool. So here's like the back end. You can see like in the past 28 days, we got 36,000 views, 5.8 thousand hours of watch time, 107 new subscribers, and $152 in revenue. Woo, we're rich. Here you could see the hour-to-hour view count. So you see big boost because we're doing a stream now. So these are people who have tuned in the past hour. And when you go to subscribers, you see, now this doesn't show how many were gained and how many were lost. It just shows the net, which is unfortunate. Instagram actually shows how many were gained and how many were lost. But so this live stream here, Israel-Palestine call-in show, -7 that day, right? And then I did a review of the 4 hostages released and why it was actually bittersweet. And that day we got 1 new subscriber, but the following day we lost 2. But it's very possible we gained 4 and actually lost 6, right? It's not showing that. And then I did this debate with Jess, another Israeli, and that actually caused a large spike. So people really seem to have liked that conversation. We could go back 90 days just to look at some more instances. Yeah, so you could see this Israel-Palestine call-in show was after weeks with no stream, so we gained some subscribers. And then right when I came back, we lost some because I guess people had the wrong impression. But you can see there are some days where we're at a net loss. Yeah, and that's the dashboard. Anyways, now you can see it all. Yeah, I'm rich. $150 million. Yeah, if there's any evidence that I'm not motivated by money to do this content, it's that $150 a month. And full transparency, I do get another 110 from patrons. And if anybody wants to become a patron and support the show, you could find how to do that in the description. We appreciate any and all support. And I'll tell you, the vision one day is to really be able to hire somebody to work on this full time. I'll still do live streams, but they'll help maybe do streams themselves, but also help booking interesting guests and, just creating higher quality content. So that is a vision. But again, it's very hard to get that off the ground with how busy I am. So maybe one day. And it would be easier to do with community help, whether it's through becoming a patron or just volunteering your time. Gandalf says, can you do a video on entrepreneurship? Maybe. Yeah, I'd be down to do a stream and just talk about other stuff. Evan Greenberg goes, oh, Evan, good to see you here. Yeah, that's a big question of whether peace is kept via appeasement or via threat that force could happen, which I don't think that most want. Iran really wants World War III. I don't think Iran wants World War III. I think they want to see Israel destroyed through their proxies. Whitney goes, hearing the pro-Israel versus pro-Palestinian arguments isn't new. Here Israelis and Palestinians agree on the path forward and their work to build coalition and advance peace is what interests me. Yeah, I hear that. Although I would say most channels, most activists are not showing both sides. They're really just presenting one side. But I do agree. That's what's most important, getting to see the agreement, a consensus being built. So Cowboy Roy Rogers is saying your channel is huge compared to mine. I cover too many controversial and different topics. So why don't we all give Cowboy Roy Rogers a subscribe, support that channel, see that controversial topic. Cool. Anyways, we're going to wrap it up, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back next week with another stream. Not quite sure what yet. I'm actually flying to Israel on Friday. I'll be there for anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. And spend some time with family. I know it's a shitty time to go right before escalation with Lebanon, but I'm not going for leisure as much as I'm going to be with family. I'll do some live streams from there. Maybe I'll even try to organize an Israeli-Palestinian meetup. Unclear if the participants will be okay with that being filmed and live streamed, but if they are, then that'll be some content that we'll do. And again, if anybody wants to support the show, whether financially or with your time, you can reach out to me. You can find how to do that in the description. There's only so much I could do as an individual, but collectively we could accomplish a whole lot more. So that's the call to action. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. I will see you all soon.